Hi all, let's go ahead and start looking at some pieces of these graphs, but I'm just gonna look at like a section by section. So I'm not gonna do everything. Now you'll notice that the tables are already filled in for me, and I've got that for examples 1 and 3 because example 2 was your homework. But I just wanna talk about these different pieces. And I'm gonna start with the ones that I had the most questions on. So first, I had the most questions on when is it increasing, when is it decreasing? So when I look at a graph, I read it from left to right. And as I read this graph from left to right, I look at the part that is going down. This is the decreasing part, okay? Then I also look at the part that is going up, and that would be the increasing portion. Now, there's a part right in the middle of that where these two graphs turn around. This is actually this imaginary line here, and this imaginary line cuts the graph in half, is also known as the axis of symmetry. So the axis of symmetry is where x equals -3, okay? Now, on the left side of x equals -3, then over here, it's x is less than -3. Then on the right side of that is where x is going to be greater than -3. So where is the graph decreasing? So let's go ahead and look at it. If I could just zoom in enough to look at it, and I kind of can't. I'm looking at this piece here. Let me see if I can outline it, okay? So this piece here going this direction. So this stuff over here is where x is less than -3. So that's where it's decreasing. Now on the other side of that axis of symmetry, or the line of symmetry, is where x is greater than 3. So this side over here is where the graph is actually increasing. Okay? So when I'm looking at these, I'm just going, hey, is it to the left of the axis of symmetry or to the right of the axis of symmetry? Well, if it's to the left, that's where it was coming down. So that's where I had it highlighted red. And then to the right, that's where it was going up, is increasing, and that's what I highlighted green. So that is the decreasing and the increasing portion of a graph, okay? So let's look at number 2. Even though this one's yours, I want to show you what I'm talking about here. If I read the graph from left to right, this part of the graph is decreasing. Then this part of the graph, after it turns around, is the increasing portion. What you're going to be looking for is, what is that axis of symmetry? What is the x value that cuts the graph directly in half? That's going to help you determine if it's less than that axis of symmetry or greater than that axis of symmetry. Okay? All right, so here's the next one that I'm looking at. Again, I'm just looking for whether it's increasing or decreasing. So I'm going to read the graph from left to right. From left to right, this one is actually increasing first. So this is the increasing portion of the graph, and then this is the decreasing portion of the graph. Now, remember that I also have that line that cuts it right in half. That's known as the line of symmetry, or the axis of symmetry. And that crosses the x-axis where x equals 3. So if that's x equals 3 to the left of it, then these numbers must be smaller than 3. And to the right of it, these numbers must be bigger than 3. So left of that blue imaginary line, that's the increasing portion. So it's increasing when x is less than 3. And it's decreasing when x is greater than 3. Okay? All right, so now let me erase some stuff that I have here. So that's it for the increasing and decreasing part. Okay? And now I'm going to go ahead and talk about my next asked question, which was, how do I know when it's positive or negative? So if something is positive, it is above the x-axis. So this portion here is above the x-axis, and this portion here is above the x-axis. That's when it's positive, okay? Then when is it negative? Well, that's the other portion when it is beneath the x-axis. All right, so now that I've got that on this one, let's go ahead and look at the other two graphs. On number 2, when is it above the x-axis? This segment here and this segment here. When is it negative? When is it below the x-axis? That's this portion here. Okay? All right, now let's look at graph number 3. When is it above the x-axis? That's this portion here. When is it beneath the x-axis? When is it negative? That is that portion and this portion here. Now remember, even though we can't see the whole graph, it does continue on forever and ever. Okay? All right, so let's go back to number 1. Now that we know where it's positive or whether it's negative, okay, when it's above the x-axis or below the x-axis, let's go look at how do I write that? How do I write where it's increasing or where it's decreasing? So let me zoom in here. Now, when I'm looking at this, find those points when it goes from positive to negative. So right here, it goes from positive to negative. And right here, it goes from positive to negative. So what are those numbers where it transforms from positive to negative? So this one here is where x is equal to -7. This one here is where x is equal to +1. Okay, now I'm going to pick up the color red and hope that it shows the way that I want it to. Okay, in between here, I have some x values, but these x values are between -7 and 1. Okay. All right, now these x values over here are smaller than -7. And these x values over here are greater than 1. Okay. Now, I gotta try to highlight that so you can see what I'm talking about. X is less than -7. Here, x is 7. Here, x is between -7 and 1. Then we have x is 1. And then we have x is greater than 1. So which pieces are important to us? Because now we've got all these numbers written down. So though I have all these numbers written down, this x equals -7 and this x equals -1 help me find the pieces that I really need. So to determine whether something is positive, look at where it's above the x-axis. So it is above the x-axis when x is less than -7 and when x is greater than 1. So that's when it's above the x-axis. When is it between or when is it beneath the x-axis? When x is between -7 and +1. So those are the pieces that I use to help me determine when it's positive or negative. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and look at the next couple of graphs to see if we can find that information. All right? All right, let's look at the one that you have for homework. Okay? So again, let me go ahead and talk about positive, negative. Okay? Now I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to get you started, but I expect you to finish this one. Here, the x value equals -1. Here, the x value equals 3. I want you to see if you can tell me what happens here, what happens here, and what happens here. Okay, those are the pieces that are going to tell us when it's positive or when it's negative. All right, but I have my own example to finish, so let me go to number 3. So on number 3, I'm going to look at here. If I didn't want the highlighter, I want the pen. Right here, x equals 1. Here, that should be on 5, so that's not a very good line, but x equals 5. Okay. So in here, x is between 1 and 5. On this side, x is less than 1. And over here, x is greater than 5. Okay. Now that I have these numbers here, although thank you, it was very nice of you, x equals 1 and x equals 5 to be there, they're not what I'm looking for. They were just there to help me find the pieces that I need. So when is it positive? It is positive when x is between 1 and 5. When was it negative? It was negative when x values were smaller than 1 and when x values are bigger than 5. Okay? All right, so those are those two pieces. For those of you guys that needed that, you've got that there. Now I'm going to go back and look at some other things that maybe somebody was absent for or that somebody missed. Okay? So let me go ahead and delete this information. And now let me go through the rest of this. Let's talk about domain. Well, domain is the x values when we look at the end behaviors. So if I'm looking for the domain, I'm looking at negative infinity on the left and positive infinity on the right. That's where I get negative infinity is smaller than x, and that's smaller than positive infinity. X is between negative infinity and positive infinity. Okay? Now the range, where is the range? Well, the range is looking at the y values. So if I've got the y values, I need to find the smallest y value, which is right here, and that's going to be at -4. So right here, I have -3, -4, y value being -4, and the rest of the graph is on top of that point. So the range is when y is greater than or equal to -4. Now the x-intercepts. The x-intercepts are when the graph crosses the x-axis. So when does it cross the x-axis? It crosses the x-axis here, and it crosses the x-axis here. So when x equals -7, and when x equals 1. Those are my two x-intercepts. Okay? Then what is the y-intercept? Well, the y-intercept is where the graph crosses the y-axis. So that's right here. And that's where y equals -1. Okay? All right, and the last piece. Where is the line of symmetry? Well, the line of symmetry is that point that cuts the graph directly in half. So right through the middle of the vertex. So the axis of symmetry is right here. And when we look for the axis of symmetry, or the line of symmetry, we look for the x value. So that's where x equals -3. Okay? We have our vertex here. It's -3, -4. And then the last piece was just the end behaviors. All right, have a good evening.